I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, please have a seat. So welcome to you all. My name is Liz Tentarelli. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire. Thank you for coming, and we want to thank the city clerk for allowing us to use this auditorium and thank Access Nashua for taping this for broadcast later and also as video on demand. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. The League does not support or oppose individual candidates or political parties. We do, however, work to educate the voting public and to increase the number of people who vote. So we encourage you to visit our website, lwvnh.org, to find out about additional forums or debates. In fact, the October televised forums for governor and Congress are already posted, the ones that WMUR is doing, and also to get more information about voting in elections. On the table in the hallway, we have a number of brochures about voting. Take as many of those as you feel you could use to spread the word to potential new voters. We also have a special brochure, the salmon-colored one, about the Executive Council. And so feel free to take that if you wish, to help people understand about the important office we have. Now, our program tonight is very much in the spirit of voter education, and we sincerely thank the candidates who have come tonight to make their views known and to answer our questions. We had intended to do a forum for the Republican candidates, Steve Hattemer and Dave Wheeler, at 6:30, followed by this one at 7:25. However, one of the candidates did not agree to our format, and by league rules and FCC regulations, we're not allowed to host what's called an empty chair debate with only one candidate, and since the Republican primary is its own race, we could not have just one candidate participating. And you have met two of the other candidates who are here, Republican Steve Hattemer and independent candidate Tom Stawaz. So we thank them also for running for this important office. First, a few ground rules to which the candidates have already agreed. They're going to have 5 minutes for an opening statement, then they will ask each other a question. Then I will take questions from the audience. Please raise your hand, and my friend Dan Weeks has said he would pass the microphone around to people. You have to hold it fairly close for the camera to pick it up and for it to work. Candidates will each have 2 minutes to answer questions, and I reserve the right to allow rebuttal if it seems necessary. And then the candidates will have one more chance to ask each other a question and then to give closing statements. I will ask the audience to refrain from applause to allow more time for questions and answers. My colleague Mary is in the front row holding up cards. 30 seconds left in the time. She'll hold up a yellow card. Would you like to demonstrate, Mary? Thank you. And then when we hit the 2-minute warning, she will hold up the red card. And I'll ask the candidates to complete your sentence and then to stop speaking. I also remind the candidates, I already have done this, and their party organizations and the audience that no part of this forum may be rebroadcast or shown except in its entirety. No choosing just the juicy bits for YouTube. Agreed? Please? Okay. As I said, the forum's being taped by Access Nashua, and they will broadcast it in its entirety. So we're going to begin with the opening statements by the candidates in the order determined by a coin flip earlier, and we start with Jennifer Dollar. Thank you.
Thank you very much for hosting this to League of Women Voters, and thanks to all the voters and candidates who have come here today to hear us speak. And also thanks to my opponent, Alderman Sheehan, for a lively campaign thus far. My name is Jennifer Dollar. I'm from Temple, New Hampshire. I have 3 children, Sasha, who's 22, Sam is 20, and Maggie is 13. My oldest experiences life with a developmental disability, and being the parent of a child with a developmental disability trains a person to be an advocate, an educator, and to work within different systems to make the best possible life for the child who experiences a disability. And that takes us all through life from the time it's discovered at about the age of 3 in our case, until now, where he's 22 and he's still not receiving services that he needs. He has some services, but he was one of the first to be put back on the waiting list for people who are aged out of the school system with a developmental disability. So advocacy is a passion of mine, and I hold that with me. In 2006, I was asked to run for state representative on the Democratic ticket from the former Hillsborough District 4. And I ran for that office, and I won. And that was a Democratic year where, for the first time in 134 years, the majorities in the House and the Senate were Democratic, and the governor's office was also held by a Democrat. And we did a lot of really good work. In that first year, I served on Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs with Representative Rosenwald was the chair of that committee. And we did a lot of good things. We managed to end the waiting list for people with needing services with developmental disabilities in that session. And we did some other very good work. We formed the New Hampshire Rail Transit Authority in that biennium and did a lot of other policies that we were hoping to do and didn't get passed previously. When Councilor Pignatelli announced in May that she was retiring from the position of executive counselor, I felt that I had to step up and run for the office, because back in 2010 to 2012, when the council had a 5-0 Republican majority, they were doing things with contracts such as the Planned Parenthood contract and the funding for the rail study, stymieing things and forward movement. And I realized I had campaigned with Councilor Pignatelli before, and I knew what the council did, but it really jumped out at me during that time, the importance of the executive council. So when Councilor Pignatelli said she wasn't going to seek re-election, I decided that that would be the next step for me, and that I could do the job very well. Having been a state legislator, I know what goes into creating and passing the state budget and how difficult it is to be able to balance it with the revenues that we have and the expenditures that we need to spend. So that is why I'm running, and I hope that people will vote for me in the primary and that I will win the Democratic nomination for this office.
Thank you, Ms. Dollar. Ms. Sheehan.
Thank you. I am Alderman Diane Sheehan. I would like to thank you, first of all, for running this. The League of Women Voters serves an important purpose for educating voters to make good decisions. Good information leads to better decisions. I'd like to also thank Councilor Pignatelli, who's here with us tonight, for the years of her service in general, and in particular for resurrecting the rail study, because that was very, very important to Nashua. I would also like to thank the City of Nashua for the use of the room and the access station for broadcasting it for those that couldn't be here tonight, but I'd like to finish by thanking the people who did find time to make it here tonight. I am an alderman at large in the City of Nashua. This is my third term serving the city. I was in the private industry before I had children. I have 2 children with my husband, aged 10 and 11 boys. They go to public school in Nashua, and we have a historic home in Foster Square, and my father lives with us. So I'm one of those, what they call the sandwich generation. I have elder parents at the house, as well as children that are still in school age, and that is a growing demographic in our time. So I was taking time to raise the children, and I started getting involved with things in the neighborhood. The more I sat around watching, the more it became apparent to me that things could be better. So I started advocating for community issues, got involved with neighborhood watch groups, and began attending meetings at City Hall to try to advocate for things we needed in our neighborhood. And it became obvious that my professional background was well suited to doing that. So when my children went into, the youngest went into kindergarten, I threw my hat in the ring. And from there, it did hold true that it was easier to get things done if you're one of the votes on the board versus one of the people trying to advocate. So I had a business background from a couple of different experiences. One is different than the others, was with Pitney Bowes, and I was the sales manager for New Hampshire, which took me all over the state. And then most recently after that, for a very long time, I was the indirect distribution manager for a cellular phone company, and I dealt with things like rate setting, going to the PUC, contracting anybody who was selling or providing services, dealing with PR, as well as a lot of contract work and a lot of hiring. I had a fairly good-sized staff, and they all had downlines of over 100 under them. So multi-million-dollar budget responsibility and hiring, firing, that sort of thing. A lot of that applies to what I have been doing at the city. A lot of it applies to what an executive counselor needs to do. In addition to my political experience as an alderman, I also have a very real interest in infrastructure, as it is a way to use government resources to lift people up. And as such, I became involved with the Nashua Regional Planning Commission. We have a big east-west issue in Nashua that isn't going to be solved by looking simply within Nashua. So getting involved there was a better way to get an understanding of how that works. And infrastructure has always been one of the committees that I serve on, that and human affairs, and I'm vice chair of both. But I have served on budget, personnel, pretty much everything except for the finance. I also sit on the Historic District Commission, and I do a lot of work with the Ethnic Awareness Committee. And as a result of that, the One Greater Nashua and Gate City Initiative. I have some critical reasons why I decided that this was something that I needed to do. When Councillor Pignatelli announced her retirement, she had resurrected the rail study. I was sitting on the board when Councillor Wheeler had vetoed it, wouldn't take our phone calls, and we had to go to the Telegraph to get him to show up. I saw the impact that has on our economic opportunity, and I didn't see that as a way that the state should be doing business. So when I was asked, I gave it a little bit of time and then realized I'd already wasted a week and a half thinking about it. So I did decide that it was in the interest of Nashua and Southern New Hampshire to step up and run for this. And thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Good introductions. Now, we're going to let each of you ask the other a question. Ms. Dollar, you may ask something of candidate Sheehan first.
Thank you. Alderman Sheehan, what do you think, you were mentioning similarities of being an alderman and an executive counselor. What do you think the differences would be between the two positions?
Thank you. The most obvious one is in the daytime and one is in the nighttime, so the times do not overlap. But specifically, as an alderman, it is a leadership position where you set policy, and the executive council is a portion of the executive branch. So what you are doing is part of executing the policy that the legislature has created. So they're very different roles. So in my alderman role, I have sponsored over 35 pieces of legislation in my terms. That's not something you do as executive council, but instead you are vetting and making sure that there are sound decisions being made, that there is funding available, and that we are making pragmatic investments that will be good for the state.
Okay, thank you. And would you like to ask a question of candidate Dollar now?
Sure. The Executive Council, as I had just mentioned, does a lot of roles that have a large impact. In addition to infrastructure and contract review, what experience do you have with hiring high-level, say, commission heads or judges? What is your professional experience with interviewing or vetting someone who may be being placed in a very high-level position?
Thank you. Well, I've done much interviewing. Back when I was younger, I worked as an operations director of a radio station where I had to hire technical staff, and it was a very, there are always very many applicants because people want to work in broadcasting, so I've done a lot of reviews, interviewing. I was responsible for hiring control room operators and production engineers. Also in my role, I just was the chair of the Minister Search Committee of the Temple Congregational Church, and that was a very involved 20-month process of calling a minister where we had to go through ministerial profiles and match the church's profile to the minister's profile and speak to them and interview them, and then involve also the congregation in that process. Also, as a legislator, I have worked with people from departments, had them, they've come for hearings on bills, and so I see what, especially with the Health and Human Services Department, because that was the committee I served on. So I know the issues that come before that committee and that department, and that is the largest department in the state. So I feel like I can hit the ground running with many of those issues.
All right, thank you. And at this point, we're going to take questions from the audience. We do have two other candidates for Executive Council here. And we've got a little bit of a sticky problem, because if they ask questions of these candidates, unfortunately, the candidates can't ask questions back. So I've got two members of the audience that I'm going to ask not to ask questions. I'm sorry about that. This is very awkward. So can I have some questions from the audience, please? Just raise your hand. And as I said, my friend Dan Weeks, who is, what's your official title, Dan? I've forgotten.
I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Open Democracy, founded by Granny D. Any questions?
I have a question for Alderman Sheehan. How long have you been a registered Democrat?
And we will ask that question of both candidates. Would you like to answer first, Ms. Sheehan?
Sure. I have been a progressive part of the leadership of our city for 3 terms now. I have been an undeclared candidate for my role as an alderman, because we do have a nonpartisan board and an election to keep the members of the Board of Aldermen focused on the business of the city and not necessarily the political party. I have been a contributor and a supporter of Democratic candidates for many offices, which you know because you have been at Obama events with me, and I have supported Senator Shaheen all the way back to when she was governor. So I have a proven track record as a progressive leader.
And candidate Dollar, how long have you been an active Democrat, shall we say?
Well, I've been active in electoral politics since 2004, but I've been a registered Democrat for many years before that. I would say my whole voting life.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the audience, please. Oh dear, we've got a shy bunch. No, we'll work on this. I have a question. Apparently at the July Executive Council meeting, there was discussion about raising the level of the dollar value of the contracts. that Executive Council must approve. Currently, it's $10,000 or more, and then personnel contracts of $2,500. And the argument was made by one of the existing counselors that you're dealing with a lot of small contracts, unable to focus on larger ones. I will ask each of you, and we're going to keep alternating back and forth with the answers, whether you think raising the dollar limit on the contracts is a good idea. So, Ms. Dollar, you first.
Yes, I do think raising the dollar limits on the contracts is a good idea. It's still under discussion, and it's going to be a pilot program to see if it works. But I think that it's been costing the state, what I've been reading is that it's been costing the state more money to be dealing with all these smaller contracts than the larger contracts, and that the smaller contracts can be communicated via the state webpage so that people can see them and see what's going on with them, but that the council can deal with the $25,000 and above, because things are getting more expensive and there's more of the contracts.
Gee, they're getting more expensive? Wow. News to us, no. Ms. Sheehan.
Thank you. I would like to thank Councillor Pignatelli for her work on this, because this is my understanding from Colin Van Ostern was that this was her idea, and I agree with it because of a few reasons. It represents 0.02% of the budget, and yet it accounts for 25% of the council's time, which to me is the irrelevant part, because we know what we're signing up for. We know that we are going to read contracts and be ready to vote on between 100 and 300 items each week. However, what is tied up is the staff that needs to get ready and to make over a dozen copies and to come to the hearing and be prepared to speak on it. It's tying up staff in a way that is not productive, because we have had a 100% approval of all of these. So we are using 25% of the time, and we're tying up personnel where right now it takes almost 6 weeks to get a license clearance done on a new hire, because our personnel has been cut so much. If we can remove some bureaucracy that's just not really productive, and we can allow people to do their jobs that they're hired for instead, it just makes good sense. And it's something that will still have visibility, so there's still accountability, because you can still go and look and see what the contracts are. But to spend that much personnel resources on something with such a small return just isn't a good business practice.
Thank you very much. Another question from the audience. We do have one here.
Thank you. Assuming that either one of you is successful at achieving the goal of your candidacy as executive counselor, in serving as an executive counselor, what individuals, organizations, or other resources will you rely on to make the decisions that executive counselors make in terms of approving contracts, in terms of approving appointments to the bench, to department heads, and all the very, very serious matters that come before the council in their monthly dealings?
All right. Candidate Sheehan.
Thank you, and thank you for your question, Representative Gale. I expect to do the same sort of process I do as an alderman at large for the city, which is to do some independent research as well as reach out to people and ask for education and also ask for additional resources, because I don't like to just go into something with the information that is handed to me. I prefer to have a good network of resources where I can ask for independent information and be able to look that up. And so I would be reaching out to the people depending on which it's for. I have a solid network in Nashua. When somebody calls and has an issue in the city, I am generally able to find an answer or find a resource relatively quickly because of doing this for a while now. And I have good network resources at the State House currently, and I would expect to be using the same method of work.
Ms. Dollar?
Yes, thank you for the question. I would reach out to my colleagues on the council. I would reach out to former Councilor Pignatelli with her rich experience. I would reach out to the different stakeholders and constituencies that are involved. I'm sure they will be reaching out to me as well. And to look to make the fairest decisions. For example, for looking for an agency head or to confirm somebody, I would want somebody who believes in the mission of the agency, somebody who's well respected by their peers, and that would be from learning that from speaking to their peers and people on the ground, somebody who's willing to listen, and that is also from speaking to people who have experience in the departments and the unions and the other stakeholders.
Thank you. Another question from the audience?
I'll ask one.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
I have the opportunity on Monday mornings to volunteer at the soup kitchen and shelter here in town, and I'm often struck by how unfortunately removed a lot of the people there and a lot of other people I know here in Nashua and around the state seem to be from politics, how disaffected they seem to be. I know your position is one of many, and so the burden shouldn't fall entirely on you, but in what ways would you seek to reach out to people who may be underrepresented in politics and engage them more?
Ms. Dollar?
Thank you for the question, Dan. And I also have to say that Dan it's interesting because he grew up in Temple, which is where I live now, and he lives in Nashua now. So he's sort of bridging the divide there. Well, I've been doing a lot of door-to-door work with my campaign, and I've been speaking to many voters of all stripes, all socioeconomic backgrounds, and speaking to them. And it is a lot of education when you're running for executive council because many people don't know what it does. I've also been going to community events and reaching out to the different groups in the city here. And also out in the country where we live, there are also many people that are not participating. And one thing that I like to do, or what I did when I was a state representative, was go to schools and high schools and speak to social studies classes. I just was recently at an art show of children who go to the PAL program down on Ash Street, and it was just really amazing to see the program that was done there where they were given certain artwork, like Jackson Pollock, and they all did a Jackson Pollock style picture, and then they had Vincent van Gogh, and they all did a Vincent van Gogh picture, and there was an art show there, and to see and appreciate their work and come there as somebody running for office so that they can see that. So it's just a lot of outreach, and I very much enjoy that kind of outreach, so thank you.
Ms. Sheehan?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and more importantly, thank you for volunteering Monday at the soup kitchen. I have seen Tom Lopez, I think 3 times this week. I think I've had my picture taken with him twice. He is one of the outreach workers that finds employment for the people at the soup kitchen. I also saw Sister Eileen at a couple of events as well and helped hand out backpack supplies at the Nashua Back to School event on Tuesday, something that I do consistently. Tuesday, I gave a tour to children from the inner city of City Hall and showing them how it is here for them, and they are the developing leaders of the community in the lower socioeconomic parts of the city that have felt like they are not included before. One of the missions of One Greater Nashua, whose meeting I'm actually in tomorrow morning, it's a monthly meeting, is working on how do we better include people who have come to our city, how do we make cultural connections, and how do we make sure that people are aware of the resources. I came into public service because I was concerned about the inner city of French Hill and people not being able to find what they need to find, and I have found that I've gotten the reputation for that, and that's part of why I ended up running at large, I was dealing just as much with the Tree Streets neighborhood issues as I was for French Hill. Reaching out to Patty LaFrance to get victim advocacy when I'm finding people aren't aware of all the things. I have a good solid network, and I spend a good portion of my day each day doing exactly that. It is so important for everyone to know that we are here for them.
All right, thank you. Another question from the audience? Yes, sir.
Thank you both for coming tonight. And you both represent very different constituencies. And Representative Dollar seems to be more rural, and Alderman Sheehan seems to be more urban. And I'm wondering how your respective experiences will inform your performance as executive counselor, and how you'll each try to learn the others, learn more about the other's constituency.
Ms. Sheehan.
Thank you. Before I was a homeowner in Nashua, I was a homeowner in Fremont, New Hampshire, which is a small town of 3,003 people. And they changed the sign when I moved out because 2 people moved into the house. It is one of those notorious areas that has been infiltrated by the Free Staters. I have kept in touch with some of the people in that town. As a manager for the cellular phone company, my territory included all of New Hampshire and all of Vermont, so I am very familiar with the smaller and more rural areas. In fact, I've stopped into a lot of my old distributors and introduced myself because I've since been married and have a new name. For many of them, they were not aware that the signs they're seeing are actually myself. So I am familiar with the standalone economies of, say, a Peterborough and how it's not really attached to the Manchester or Nashua or Keene area. I'm familiar with trying to make a downtown thrive in Peterborough or Hillsborough or some of the areas that are trying to have this downtown feel and renaissance of a small town. And I would be looking to just spend more time and have stakeholders there that know me by name, and I have them in my caller ID because we talk frequently, and I'm plugged into that community as well. I've done it professionally, and I was very successful at it, and I expect to model the same behaviors that I did professionally.
Thank you. Ms. Dollar.
Thank you. Well, I don't see, there isn't that much of a difference in terms of what is important to people. I've been going door to door in Nashua for most of the summer speaking to voters, and most of the things that are important to Nashua voters are the same things that are important to voters in Temple, the area that I had formerly represented, which was Temple, Wilton, Limeboro, Mount Vernon, and New Boston. People want to make sure that health care reform continues. They don't want that to be closed down or stymied. They want, many people in Nashua want to see the commuter rail, and when I commuted from Exit 8 down to Boston last summer, there were people using that bus from Peterborough. People drove all the way from Peterborough to Nashua to use the public transportation. So I see myself as being able to represent the entire district, both Nashua and the towns in the district. I'm very familiar with the towns because I've represented them and I live there. But Nashua is a wonderful city, and it has a lot of vibrancy. I've been seeing a lot of that going to the different events, such as the event where the children were given backpacks and back-to-school supplies, which was wonderful, and also to the Latino festival that was at St. Aloysius Church on West Hollis Street. And just to see that kind of urban vibrancy in Nashua, it enriches the area. And when I go to some of these meetings of different groups, they talk about Greater Nashua and serving Greater Nashua. So I've served different towns than my own, and I can serve the whole district well.
Thank you. If there's one more question from the audience, I'll take it. If not, I have one more, and then we'll allow the candidates to go back and forth. Is there one more? Yes, sir. Dan, there's a question here. Thank you. Hold it real close.
Well, I'm Tom Woodward, and my question to you is that as a new candidate, I always find myself learning. And what is the learning experience you are having running for office? If there is any new learnings.
Yeah, what have you learned, Ms. Dollar?
Well, there's always something to learn when one is running for office. There is learning how to participate better in a forum, better public speaking, better communication, how to reach out to voters most effectively, and being able to manage time, money, resources, and people. And so I find every election is a different election, and every election is a new learning experience. It is very different knocking on doors of Democratic voters in Nashua than it is to knock on the doors of undeclared voters in New Ipswich, for example.
Tell us an experience you had with undeclared voters. This sounds fascinating. What kind of reaction do you get?
Well, in New Ipswich, it was interesting because it's a very heavily Republican town. So Republicans didn't really go door to door there because they took it for granted, and Democrats didn't go because they knew that they weren't going to win there. So most of the reaction I got was, oh, a politician has never come to my door and asked me anything before.
Thank you. Interesting. Ms. Sheehan, what have you learned in this campaign?
Mostly, it's very similar to running at large in Nashua because we have 87,000 people in Nashua, which is about a third. I would say that what I'm learning is more the nuts and bolts of how to navigate the Democratic database. So the vote building program has been my learning experience, and just that for me has been the biggest learning curve.
All right. Thank you very much. At this point, again, by the flip of the coin, we're going to have a question from each candidate for the other, and then we'll have the closing statements. And by the flip of the coin, Ms. Sheehan, you're going to ask the question first at this point.
Sure. Earlier, I had asked Ms. Dollar what experience she had with hiring high-level directors or employees. I will follow up with, what experience do you have with infrastructure, either planning or approval, or developing either a policy about it? What is your background with infrastructure?
Well, my background with infrastructure is basically the general background of a legislator, and the policy for state infrastructure belongs with the legislature, and the Executive Council approves the contracts. If there are contracts, or approves, if there's federal funding, will approve federal funding. So it's a very generalized background, but if there's any research I need to do or answers to questions I have, I know where to find them. And
okay, thank you. Ms. Dollar, a question from you for Ms. Sheehan.
so, Ms. Sheehan, we're both Democrats, and one of us will have the nomination for the Executive Council from District 5. I will support you if you are to get the nomination. Will you support me if I'm to get the nomination?
Of course.
Simple answer and a very good one. Thank you. At this point, we will move on to closing questions, but I did not see Councilor Pignatelli when she came in, and thank you for being here very much, and thank you for your years of service on the Executive Council. So our closing comments in coin flip order. Alderman Sheehan, thank you. You're first.
5 minutes? Is that okay?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay,
Thank you.
thank you. I would like to again thank everybody for coming here tonight, and for the League of Women Voters for putting this together. I appreciate the efforts that were made to get both sides here, and I think it would have been good for the voters to be able to see that. It's unfortunate that Mr. Wheeler chose not to participate. I think that when people have the best information, they make the best decisions. So I do applaud Dr. Hattemer for joining us, and I'm going to mess up your name, Tom Stanowitz. I'm sorry, for being here and for making those attempts. I think it's important to consider November when thinking about this primary and what we have facing us in the next term. We have that rail will be acted on, and we could have the legislature, the Senate, and the governor all get on board and be excited, and then the first time a check needs to be written to make that move forward, we could have it held up in the Executive Council. Right now, taking out Councilor Pignatelli's crucial vote, you know, it's a 2-2 split, and to be able to see the votes that the Executive Council needs to make politicized the way they have been in the past would just set the clock back on many things that we're working very hard on. For example, Medicaid expansion will be continued in the next round. We have the opportunity to act on rail potentially. There will be energy policies and things move forward regarding that. These are all things that are very critical that will not be able to be undone. So we need to have a very strong candidate who will be able to work with the 10-year transportation improvement plan, who will be making decisions based on what will lift everybody in New Hampshire up. And I think either candidate up here will probably have similar voting positions. I think what comes down to the difference is a professional experience with hiring at that level and the ability to run a campaign in November that can beat David Wheeler, because we have seen what he has done, and he is, I think, why both of us are sitting here. We've seen what happened in 2010, and nobody wants to see that happen again. So I would like to thank everybody again for coming, and thank Mrs. Dollar for running and the time that she has put in to her state positions in the past. And I would urge everyone to show up on September 9th and vote, or we will get what we deserve if nobody votes. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Dollar.
Well, I'm very happy to be running for Executive Council. I'm also very proud to have the endorsement of the SEIU 1984 local, and I'm also very proud to have received the Hillsborough County Democratic Committee's Grassroots Award for House District 25. I was with the Democrats in the House at the darkest time for Democrats, when we were outnumbered 3-1. I stood up when we were at our lowest point, and I ran a special election against Bill O'Brien's hand-picked candidate in Bill O'Brien's district, and I beat him. And that was the turning of the tide that changed 2010 and made 2012 possible, where we took back the House, we made gains in the Senate, we kept the governor's office, and the Executive Council went from 5-0 Republicans to a 3-2 Democratic majority. I can do that again in November if you will give me the nomination. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Before I close the forum, I would like to say that there has been a change in the polling places for certain wards in Nashua. And I'm afraid, because I don't live here, I don't know exactly what they are. So I just want to alert the voters who may be viewing this on TV to perhaps call the city clerk if they are not sure where their voting place is on September 9th. Does anybody here happen to know which wards are affected?
I do.
5 and
3, 5, and 1, and all the affected voters were sent mail this week that informed them of where their new voting is and what the hours are.
So that's 1, 3, and 5, and they should have gotten word, but as I said, if you're not sure, call City Hall. You'll be able to find out. We also, as I said, have some brochures. Please take any that would be helpful to you in helping to get out the vote. We have a Spanish language version on the green paper, and that can be distributed. At this point, I want to lift my embargo on applause, because I thank the candidates very much for being here, being so candid with their answers, and thank you for coming. So let's applaud our candidates. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Good night.